Order, order. I call Andrew George to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Vickers, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of quota negotiations on the UK fishing fleet 2025. And in doing so, I come at this debate as someone who's not entirely new to fisheries debates, having been involved in them in the early days of my parliamentary career in 1997, and on a number of occasions since. And what I've always found in relation to how the fishing industry is perceived by the political process is there seems to be an inverse relationship between politicians, or I think collectively politicians desire not to interfere with the fishing industry, and the inevitability that politics has to interfere in order to help establish and sustain an industry which is so important to this country. And it's always struck me that the industry is one where indeed there's a further kind of inverse relationship, in the sense that it seems that those industries which are or rather work in and are exposed to the raw power of nature seem to have a higher degree of regulation and administrative burden, which is kind of disproportionate, if you like, to their if you like, sense of freedom from office-based activity. So it's interesting also, perhaps, a contrast that those political parties which always seem to be keen to use the fishing industry as the poster boys for their campaign and send flotillas up the Thames don't seem to be terribly interested in discussing the detail when it comes to the hard miles. You know, that's yes, of course I'll give way. Yes.
Thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate him on securing the debate. Though he didn't name the individuals concerned, does he consider the fact that they may have other fish to fry?
Well, there's I think we could spend all morning exchanging fishing industry puns, and but I think it would be better if we got back down to the nitty-gritty of trying to advance the policy for the benefit of the fishing industry. Now, the Minister will appreciate that you know what goes on in my constituency, because I did appreciate his visit to the constituency last summer when he came to Newlyn and Sen and other areas around Cornwall to look at the activities within the industry, and that was very much appreciated. And it's quite clear that he has a very sincere interest in the industry, and clearly he's not personally responsible for what he has inherited, but clearly has a very significant task on his hand in terms of helping the industry find a way forward. And that indeed is what I hope we can encourage him to do today, because the issue for me and indeed us is that, and I'm speaking on behalf of the industry, which I've spoken to on a number of occasions since the beginning of this year as well, is how last year's quota negotiations are impacting on the prospects for the industry this year. So, yes, of course.
I thank the honourable member for allowing my intervention and for introducing this debate in a very light-hearted way, initially at least, which is a contrast to some of the discussions previously. But would he be concerned at all about reports that our French allies are seeking to link fishing quotas to other matters, such as access to the €150 billion defence budget? And would he agree with me that the government should clarify their position on this, and perhaps ask the Minister to do so this morning?
I'm sure the Minister heard that intervention, and it does trouble me, I have to say, that going back even to our negotiations in 1974, when Edward Heath was involved in the negotiation of our entry into the EU, and subsequent negotiations, that indeed very often the fishing industry is used as a pawn, a bargaining chip in those negotiations, and it would be a great pity, and I hope that the Minister will use his influence. I know that fishing ministers don't usually sit around the cabinet table, but I do hope that he will make sure that the message is heard loud and clear within the cabinet and to the Prime Minister that the fishing industry is not a bargaining chip that can be handled in that manner. I'll give way to my honourable friend, and then I'll give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving, because he's already spoken about political intervention. Fishery quotas negotiations are difficult and nuanced at the best of times. Understanding the granular detail of advice, for example, is never straightforward. It always goes badly wrong when you bring in other considerations. And does he agree with me that actually both our national security and our fishing industry deserve better treatment than the sort that the honourable gentleman has just outlined, if indeed it is true as reported?
Well, once again, I mean, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that intervention, and indeed it is important that the future and the merits of the fishing industry, if we were to establish a sustainable industry which is fair to UK fishermen, that what we have is one that is reviewed on its merits and on the basis of science, and not on the basis of political horse trading with other countries. So I strongly accept that point. Yeah, of course I will.
Given the debate that we're having and this talk of the risk that our fishing communities could be used as a bargaining chip, does the honourable member agree with me that, as the government have said, food security is national security, and we can't have our fishing communities and fishing stocks traded against defence in any way?
No. I mean, these negotiations are extreme. I'm grateful to the honourable member for that intervention. These negotiations are always difficult at the best, you know, even at peacetime, as it were. I suppose we are at peacetime, but certainly, you know, at the best of times. But the fact is that we need to make sure that these decisions are made on the basis of merit. But at the back of our minds, of course, we understand that of course we wish to re-establish UK fishing entitlement out to the 12-mile limit, and to ensure that foreign vessels are not able to use their past historic entitlements to fish within the 6 to 12 mile zone, and indeed relative stability within the common fisheries policy left the UK, particularly in the western approaches, with a significantly poorer deal in comparison with many of our European colleagues countries. And that is the basis of clearly a great deal of disquiet within the industry, and that runs forward. I'll give way further.
Very generous with your time, and I'm very fortunate to represent the fishing fleet off the Berwickshire coast, which is relatively small but very active, together with the fish processing industry. But the Scottish Fishermen's Federation produced a very helpful briefing note ahead of today's debate. And one of the points that they make is, since the UK left the EU in 2020, the UK's opportunities and Scotland's opportunities have increased greatly, and those opportunities would not have been there had we remained in the EU. Does the honourable member agree with the Scottish Fishermen's Federation?
I disagree. I think that overall the impact on the fishing industry has been a net negative, particularly for those, and certainly that affects those in my own region, which depend substantially on on the export of fish to other European countries. I mean, the majority of the fish landed in Newlyn, which is a very substantial port in my constituency. At least 80% of that fish goes to France, or has done in the past, to France, Spain and other European countries. The impact that and other veterinary inspection and vivier export requirements and licenses have had on the industry has been significantly detrimental. So I don't accept, and maybe that's a conversation I'll be very happy to have with the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. But certainly it's by no means one that one can say that it's been a great success, because that's certainly not the case, and certainly not one. If you speak to the fishermen in my area, that they feel that they've been well treated as a result of those negotiations. One of the outcomes, which it was indeed the industry which won, and indeed being a passionate Remainer, I was prepared to accept that on the face of it there was a potential benefit, and there should have been a potential benefit. It was the only industry for which it was possible to make an argument that there could be a potential benefit to the industry as a result of Brexit, but that has not indeed happened. So I reject the basis of that intervention and the point made. What I would say is that I do hope that the Minister will, in time, look at the opportunities, rather than looking at this sort of stop-start approach which I'm going to refer to today. Ultimately, I'll get down to that point after all the interventions, is that to look instead at a medium and longer term setting of quotas. So in fact, multi-annual quotas, perhaps up to 5 years, a rolling multi-annual quotas should be the objective of this government, and to work with scientists so that the industry can see a way forward, rather than, as they have at present, having to adjust their business plans at very short notice. I will be adding a few small points about the small scale fishing industry and the low impact industry. And indeed, I come to this debate as someone with a limited amount of experience within the industry itself. And certainly when I was younger, our family had a boat in the south of the constituency at Mullion, which used to supplement our income from the small holding that we had. And it was a very low impact outboard motor and oar based fishing activity, which involved the setting of lobster and crab pots, very little mechanised, all pulled by hand, and mackerel hand lining. Very much low impact fishery, and one which we could only undertake during the summer months because of the storms which came in to the coast in Mullion over the winter period. So I have that experience, and indeed many members of my family are engaged in the industry. I mean, the Cornish fishing fleet lands has a value to the Cornish economy of £174 million, and 8,000 jobs are employed in the industry. So when it comes to looking at the impact of the 2025 quota settlement, I particularly wanted to address the issue of the impact of that quota settlement in relation to choke species, which is going to have a detrimental impact on significant amount of fishing which takes place around the western approaches. I mean, the first and kind of headline impact is that of pollock, the bycatch fishery. It's very much a bycatch fishery only, and each boat is only allowed just 75 kilograms per month for under 10 metre boats. And we have to remember that this is an ultra mixed fishery. So even though those fishermen are not targeting pollock, it's difficult to avoid catching them, even though they're targeting other species such as hake. But they end up, because because pollock is more healthy than I think the science seems to indicate, they're catching a lot more pollock, and of course under the regulations are obliged to land it. When this the long-term ban was announced last year, the previous government provided financial support for only 1 year. There's been no further announcement by the Minister or the new government with regard to any other compensation which might be available for those affected by the pollock ban. And I'd be very interested to know whether the Minister has anything to say in that respect. The industry asks for management measures for the recreational industry. At present, there is no management in place for the recreational fleet. And the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation estimates that up to 50% of the total pollock catch around our waters are taken by the recreational angling industry. The ICES, International Committee for the Exploration of Seas, advice for pollock is currently being benchmarked, as the Minister knows, and this is a formal review of the available science which will lead to new advice in June this year. And what I'd be very interested to know, and I think the House would be interested to know, is what power and influence the Minister has in this regard leading to June, and any decisions taken after June when that benchmarking process has completed. I mean, would he commit to introducing any new management of the pollock stock on or before the completion of the benchmarking process? Because we cannot, and the industry cannot wait until next January. The same applies to Dover Sole. There are similar problems where our fleet are targeting megrims and monkfish, but the Dover Sole is known to be abundant in many areas. So in Area 7E and Area 7F and G, the Dover is relatively abundant, and therefore the TAC for those areas is relatively good. But areas at 7H, J and K has a lack of data, which has resulted in a precautionary, much lower total allowable catch. For example, 400 kilograms per month can be caught by each boat in Area 7E, that is of Dover Sole, whilst in 7H that is limited to just 30 kilograms per month. And that obviously does very much restrict, because of the catches that have been experienced, a very significant diminution in terms of the activity which the industry can pursue. In the 23-24, the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation fleet worked with CFAS to collect genetic samples of sole in both 7E and 7H areas to provide evidence of the genetic links between the two stocks. And not surprisingly, they as expected, they conceive that obviously Dover sole swim between these areas, and if this is proven and accepted, there will be greater confidence in setting fishing opportunities for the fleet to target monkfish and megrim in those other areas. And so we're hoping that the Minister will prioritise the review of the scientific evidence at the UK-EU specialised committee on fisheries, with a view to making a joint request to ICES to amend the total allowable catch for Dover sole in that area. Similarly, spur dog, which is a slender shark found in our waters, the industry is working with scientists and CFAS and non-governmental organisations, environmentalists, to aid the recovery of this stock, providing a bycatch and discard data. This fishery reopened in 2023 with a precautionary management measure of 1 metre maximum landing size. It is a non-target species in a mixed fishery, so its increasing abundance is leading to increased unavoidable bycatch, forcing vessels to discard fish over 1 metre in length. The written record in December agreed that this rule should be reviewed in 24 and 2025, but so far no meaningful adjustment has been made. Can the Minister please promise to follow through on this commitment to review the 1 metre rule and work with the industry to develop more sustainable management measures? Further, bluefin tuna in our waters, which has been a dramatic recovery in recent years, or recent decades. So the Atlantic bluefin tuna had seen drastic cuts in catch limits and a crackdown on illegal and unreported catches across the whole range of fish in the past, which led to the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas has taken action over the last 20 years to reach a tipping point. But over the last decade, the recovery has benefited, or rather benefited, of course, that fishery, and has reached the shores of Cornwall, with sightings of Atlantic bluefin tuna increasing by a factor of 60 since just a decade ago. The total allowable catch set by the International Committee is over 40,000 tonnes, more than half of which is allocated to the EU. But in 2021, the UK received 50 tonnes of quota initially for bycatch, and in 2025, the UK quota is 66 tonnes, with 44 tonnes for commercial hook and line vessels, but 16 tonnes, almost a quarter of the entire quota, is set aside for accidental mortality from recreational catch and release permits. Tuna is vulnerable to unintended mortality due to the long fights that often endure with anglers, and so there has been a mandatory training and strict handling procedures applied to those vessels, with a release of over 1,700 tuna with minimal mortality. But in 2024, recreational catch and release permits were introduced with a voluntary code of conduct and training. So my question to the Minister is, would the Minister join a roundtable meeting of MPs, fishers and scientists to look at how the UK tuna industry can be managed more sustainably? There are, of course, other concerns, and just because of time, Mr. Vickers, I won't detain the House for very much longer. But there are also issues which I know the Minister is aware of, and I've spoken to him about the impact of regulations on particularly small-scale fishing industry. Those boats under 7 metres, those day boats that fish around our coast and catch less than 1% of the annual catch. There is one in particular that on the Isles of Scilly, Geoff Hicks, who I met on the island of St Agnes last summer, who has particularly gone out of his way over the last 5 years to develop a fishery which has the lowest possible impact, where there's no plastic involved in it, there's no fuel involved, so he uses sail and oar, and he makes his crab pots entirely out of natural materials, of course, including growing his own withies and tamarisk to make his own pots. And he's sustaining a living from this. Now, admittedly, some of the restaurants on the Isles of Scilly are able to provide him with relatively healthy prices for his produce, but nevertheless he's demonstrating that it can work. But what he complains to me is that all of the same regulations that apply to super trawlers applies to him with his homemade boat and his locally made lobster and crab pots. And I would urge the Minister to perhaps with me have a close look at this. I'm not arguing that this is going to be the future for the fishing industry and that we can feed the nation by this method. But the fact is that it can make a measurable, difference, and also provide an alternative way of catching fish in areas like mine, and no doubt other places as well, and could forge a different approach, which if we could just take some of those certainly unnecessary burdens from the shoulders of people like Geoff Hicks, that would be enormously appreciated. So I'll bring my remarks to a close at this point, because I know that there are many other people who wish to speak in this debate. But all I would say to the Minister, and I hope that he'll be responding to the questions raised so far in this debate, is that I believe that politicians and the fishing industry are all pushing in the same direction, wanting a sustainable industry based on the best available science. But we do need to make sure that the regulations that we have that are informed by that science don't create unintended consequences which actually have detrimental impact on the fish stocks and don't particularly help the fishing industry either. I mean, things have changed and the culture has changed. I would say the industry are much more engaged with a science-based approach than perhaps they were when I first engaged in these debates nearly 30 years ago. But I do hope that we'll continue with openness, dialogue, and indeed pushing for efficiency in the way that we approach the updating of these regulations this year, because those pressures on the specific fisheries that I mentioned earlier that are being affected by the choke stocks like pollock and Dover sole do need to be addressed before the end of the year. So thank you very much, Mr. Vickers.
I remind members that if they wish to speak, they should bob. I intend calling the front benches at 10:28, so if members could bear that in mind, we can probably manage without without a formal time limit. The question is that this House has considered the impact of quota negotiations on the UK fishing fleet in 2025. John Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the honourable gentleman on securing this important debate. I might start by declaring sort of an interest in this. In his previous life, I was a special advisor with the Scotland office, and I spent the larger part of 2021 working on exports from Scotland to the EU. And I have to tell the honourable gentleman that the EU, far from being avuncular, and our friends in this, were a protectionist bloc. Many of the difficulties we face, and he mentioned Vivier transport, the transport of live langoustines in particular, was made very difficult by problems on the far side of the short straits. You may say it was bloody-mindedness at best and outright protectionism at worst. But let's talk about chips. And not the golden fried essential component of what we Scots call the fish supper, but bargaining chips. For yet again, that's what our fishing crews risk becoming. The statistics are superficially simple. The ONS says that in 2021, fishing accounted for just 0.03% of the UK's economic output. But that does not capture the reality that for a great many of our fragile coastal communities, not only in Scotland but across the UK, are entirely dependent on jobs in fishing's at-sea component and its allied onshore processors. And if fishing were a trifling little homespun affair, why are the EU so very interested in it? With the Business and Trade Committee, I travelled to Brussels to discuss this government's reset of relations. What Labour expects from this reset is opaque at best, but, good protectionists that they are, the EU have an invoice already drawn up. Top of their list? Fishing. And amidst warm words about security and cooperation between Britain and the EU, the French are keen to lock us out of this new £150 billion Euro defence fund, only to then show a bit of ankle on negotiations on involving, quelle surprise, fishing. Just as Labour's Employment Rights Bill takes us back to 1979 and the winter of discontent with its heavy pro-union bias, so fishing is drifting back to 1973. Then our prized and pristine waters were the quid pro quo for access to what was then the EEC. Today, the dice are loaded in favour of the EU fleet. According to the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, and I note that the Honourable Gentleman is not a huge fan of them, but I certainly am, the EU catches around 7 times more fish by value in UK waters than we land from EU waters. Britain's status as an independent coastal state was hard won, and we must not allow our fleet to be dragged back into the ambit of the hated common fisheries policy. We cannot allow a linkage between fisheries and access to markets to be established. British fishing, Chairman, is already under a series of threats. And let's be clear as the blue ocean about the conservation issue. Fishermen are to the fore in this area, for they know that if they clear the seas of fish today, then there is no tomorrow for them. And things such as spatial squeeze are real. Our seas are vast but not limitless. Boats cannot fish between floating wind turbines or trawl near their subsea infrastructure. To say boats can simply up nets and go elsewhere is to demonstrate a terrifying lack of knowledge about the sea. Fish and seafood are not evenly suffused. They are in some places and not in others. Chair, fishing is food security, as we've heard. It's a livelihood for many, not just those who literally risk life and limb on the storm-tossed seas, but onshore too. Fish and chips are as emblematic of this country as the bright fishing boats at quaysides from Kirkcudbright to Kirkwall and more. And they must not be frittered away at the behest of an avaricious EU. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, a real pleasure to speak in this debate. First of all, the Chair serve under your chairship, but can I commend the honourable gentleman for setting the scene so very well. Fishing is an important factor for me. It is as an MP who represents the village of Portavogie in my constituency, because the MP for South Down, who takes his money incidentally, but doesn't take a seat in this House. I also have to speak for the fishing sector in Kilkeel and Ardglass. Quite happy to do that, by the way. I do it regularly and everything to represent the viewpoint of those together collectively and to ensure that we have a voice in this House. I liaise with the fishing bodies in Northern Ireland. I have to say that the feeling, as things stand, that the quota negotiations are something that they're happy with at this moment, providing the government continue to deliver the quota allocations to the sector in Northern Ireland as they have indicated that they would, and that government doesn't take a backward step and grant the EU more than they have currently at the expense of our fishing sector and industry. Minister, the message from my fishermen from the Anglo North Fishing Producers Organisation and the Irish Fish Producers Organisation is simple. The Minister's met them and he knows. I'm hoping actually that the Minister will come over sometime shortly to meet our fishermen. I look forward to that occasion. I know they have a very high opinion of the Minister and they see him as one who stands firm, government stands firm, and to use a pun, don't roll back and where we are at this moment in time. Northern Ireland Industry's priority for these negotiations isn't necessarily quota, but it is this, as access to the Republic of Ireland's 6 to 12 nautical mile zone, which we lost through Brexit. So my question to the Minister will be along them lines. In the original withdrawal agreement, France was granted access to UK waters, specifically English waters on the south coast, on the basis of grandfather rights. There is therefore, I believe, a precedent of offering access to limited named vessels in these negotiations. The principle of promoting access for UK vessels to EU waters has mixed reception between those who want their scallopers, which we have many in Northern Ireland, to have access to French waters, and those who, with the exception of EU-owned flagships, would like to see the EU vessels out of UK waters. So that's one of my 3 questions to answer, Minister. That's the first one. It is my belief, and as I stated earlier, that the top priority for the Northern Ireland fleet in the upcoming negotiations is to have access restored to these parts of their traditional fishing grounds that they had grandfather rights to, that lie in the 6 to 12 mile zone of Irish waters. And given that the precedent has been set when the UK granted access to its territorial waters to a limited number of named EU vessels, can the Minister confirm that he will press for Northern Ireland's vessels to have the same privilege as those granted by the previous government to the French? The second question I would like to pose, if I can, Mr Chairman, comes from the, and I use an Ulster-Scot word, shenanigans, being played out between the UK and the EU. The UK has banned bottom trawling in some areas of UK waters that are important to the French trawling fleet. I understand the reason for that and I support it. The ban does apply, of course, to both UK and all other countries. By way of retaliation, the French, well, they're well known for their retaliation. You give them a kick and they kick you back almost twice as hard. The French have linked fishing rights to the Security Action for Europe initiative. Oh, yeah, there's always a clause, there's always an add-on to anything that the French do. I could make some comments, but I won't. There are claims that the EU is trying to play politics with the livelihoods of UK fishermen by attempting to link defence contracts to fishing rights. So will the Minister take this opportunity to renew his commitment to treating food security as national security, and will the Minister commit to pushing back against any attempt to use our fishing communities as pawns in wider political games? I know the Minister is a man, an honest politician, an honest Minister, and his fighting will be for our fishermen, and I wish him well in that. Mr Chairman, our fishing industry, and coming to conclusion, relies on the government to be their mouthpiece and their strength. And I know that the Minister's desire, and now is the time, I believe, to prove to our fishing crews and to our fish producers that this new government is on the side of our industry and prepared to push and, if necessary, fight their part. The industry is more than the fishing crew. There are so many subsidiary businesses that rely on the industry. On behalf of those people, my people, I ask our Minister here to send a clear message from our government and this House especially that the fishing industry is alive and well and ready to thrive even more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I thank the honourable member for saying ayes for securing this debate. And I rise today to speak on behalf of the fishing communities, both in my Gordon and Buchan constituency, but also wider North East Scotland, who play such a crucial role to the UK's fishing sector, but who are facing unprecedented challenges following, amongst other things, the most recent quota negotiations. The total allowable catch, the TCA quota negotiations, has been another example of the UK losing when Labour governments negotiate. DEFRA's own analysis showed that the UK quota for the most recent negotiations fell by 5% for 2025, representing a 38,000-tonne decrease and a £9 million reduction in the value of fishing opportunities. In total, the UK secured approximately 747,000 tonnes of quota, valued at about £950 million, a decrease from 2024 in both tonnage and value. And let's not forget, behind every percentage point of this reduction are real people, fishermen and women, their families and our coastal communities, who now face difficult decisions about their future. And that is before we even start to consider paperfish, a term which refers to the quota allocations which can't realistically be caught, i.e. the benefit of them exists only on paper. And this might happen, for example, where a country is allocated quota for species which aren't present in sufficient quantities in their water, whether quota is allocated for species that the fish doesn't have the correct gear or capability to catch, or whether quota exists administratively but doesn't translate to actual fishing opportunities. The Scottish Fisheries Federation and other fisheries organisations have highlighted the distorting effect of paperfish when discussing quota negotiations, because it means that actual usable quota is less than what appears in official statistics. Some quotas look great on paper but provide no benefit to the fleet. DEFRA has published two reports, one on the economic outcomes and second on sustainability, considering the UK's fishing opportunities for this year. And we should remember that sustainability under the Fisheries Act has three pillars: environmental, social and economic, and that no one pillar takes precedent over the other. In Scotland, around 70% of key commercial stocks are fished sustainably, and yes, there is still room for improvement, but it is important to recognise that progress has been made in the last 30 years. For example, in 1991, the same indicators show that sustainability levels were only at 35%. The industry has driven this alongside fishery scientists and fishery managers, because no one has a greater vested interest in healthy seas and healthy fish stocks than our fishermen and those who depend on them for their livelihoods. There is still much work to do for the UK's fishing industry to benefit from this full extent following Brexit and what was then the broken, unequitable common fisheries policy. Under the adjustment period of the TCA, the EU has still got unrestricted access to the EU economic zone, exclusive economic zone. This benefits the EU far more than the UK, and the EU wishes, unsurprisingly, for this to continue into the future. And as other members have mentioned today, we just have to look how things have developed in recent weeks to get a true understanding of the EU's approach to fishery negotiations, with some EU member states now saying that unless the EU gives way unless the UK gives way to exactly what the EU wants on fishing, then the UK will be excluded from the EU's defence fund. It's almost unbelievable that anyone would risk the safety and security and defence of Europe and their allies on such a pretence. Fishing and defence, indeed national and international security, should not be conflated. Our national security is vital, our energy security is vital, and our food security, of which fishing plays a major part, is vital. And each should be dealt with on its own rights. We cannot allow our fishing communities to be caught up in this EU posturing. The UK government must state unambiguously that giving up its rights to our waters and natural resources would represent a long-term loss of the national asset critical for food security and production of climate-smart food, and I invite the Minister to do so today. And to conclude, I urge the Minister to also commit to securing a better deal for the EU fishing in the revised TCA, one that genuinely rebalances quota towards zonal attachment principles and to protect our fishing grounds. Will this government ensure that small-scale and coastal fishery operations have proper representation in future negotiations? The Conservative Party committed to this in our manifesto, along with seeking additional opportunities for these vital parts of our fishing fleet. Thank you.
Melanie On.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning and congratulate the honourable gentleman for securing this important debate at a critical time in the EU negotiations. And I had not originally intended to speak. I was just going to intervene. I heard the honourable gentleman lamenting the interventions, and so I thought I'd just focus on a couple of points. One is about science, one is about the EU negotiations. My constituency of Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, of course, has a long-standing, proud fishing heritage, having been the largest fishing port in the world at its height. Those days have moved on significantly. And what we have left is a single company that operates a fleet that largely fishes out of Peterhead, where the majority of the fish are at the moment. And we have a significant fish processing sector that employs around 6,000 people. So the range and the scope of the fisheries sector goes far beyond only catching. And I think that that's something that is worth remembering in this debate, that the number of jobs that come from the entirety of fisheries is important all around the coast of this nation. I was very struck by the honourable gentleman's comments about the differences in expectations between super trawlers and individual fishers. And we talk about the fishing industry as if it is one industry rather than a collection of individual self-employed small businesses, micro businesses for some. And it is worth some consideration, I think, of looking at the differentials between size and scope and range of capacity when it comes to those different businesses that operate around the country, in the same way that we have differentials for other businesses too. So we've got, large sector businesses as well as SME categories. And that may well assist in some of the issues that the honourable gentleman was raising. And what struck me, I think, from the honourable gentleman, the honourable member for Buchan as well, that when we were talking about relying on science in order to drive our fisheries and to give us the scope of the TAC, that the science is often too slow, doesn't meet the needs of fishers who are looking not only for what they are going to be catching today, but hopefully what they'll be catching in 6 months or a year's time. And although things have improved between the fisheries sector and the scientific sector, that there is still room to improve and to speed up some of the information that comes from the scientific community to inform the fisheries community, so that there is much greater flow of information and that is properly reflected when it comes to the capacity and the amount that fishermen are allowed to catch, and the species that they're allowed to catch as well. I was quite surprised. Fisheries is not it's not new that fisheries is used as a negotiating tactic, particularly when it comes to defence. It was critical in the establishment of NATO, much to Grimsby's misfortune in the 1970s. The agreement with Iceland that started the Cod Wars of the 1970s was purely down to negotiations around the establishment of NATO and in Iceland, having a base in Iceland for the United States, and that impinging on the space in which Grimsby trawlers could go out and catch. So this is not new, and it does pose an inherent danger that the desire for safety and security in our nation is then weighed against potentially livelihoods and an industry. But I really do think that in these very, very insecure times internationally, when it comes to defence, that we should be aware of the likelihood of the expectations of the EU, so we go into this completely open-eyed, but unafraid to defend what remains of our fishing sector, to give it the hope that it needs to continue to sustain and to grow. And I think it's important that we don't serve up too much politics in that, to be honest. The conversations since leaving the EU, many years for the Conservative Party of wrangling over the issue of Europe, I think is unhelpful when it comes to a very practical manner in which EU member states tend to undertake their negotiations. So having a level head and maintaining a practical and very clear-eyed perspective on these negotiations is very important. And despite what noise we hear from the negotiations from those EU member states, it is right that we remember it is a negotiation. So people will start to raise flags about the issues that are important to them. There is an opportunity, of course, for UK fisheries when it comes to exports with the EU. For much of what we catch, much of what we have when it comes to farming, crayfish, specialist fish that does not tend to get eaten in this country, is something that the EU will want much of for their slightly non-white fish palates. So there is plenty of opportunity and much, and I would say not as much to fear as I think we've heard this morning, and wish the Minister and his colleagues all the best in the course of those negotiations. But of course, just remind him that, do not be unafraid, Minister, to stand up for UK fisheries, whether in Scotland or whether in Cornwall, because we have much... and Northern Ireland. I apologise to the honourable gentleman. How could I be so remiss the day after his birthday to forget Northern Ireland? I apologise. To not be afraid of the to celebrate the UK fishing industry, to stand firm and to promote the opportunities that come from the great quality products that we have in the UK that I know members of the EU community do want. So we do have quite a lot of strength in our fishing arsenal. Thank you.
Caroline Voden.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for St Ives, for bringing this important debate, and for other members for their informed contributions. So in summing up, for the Liberal Democrats, I'd like to echo some of the points made and consider the government's approach to negotiations with the EU, and I would also like to thank the Minister for his visit to Brixham, which he made straight after the election, and for the interest he takes in the industry. I would agree with the member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes that we do need to negotiate with a clear head and try not to allow the Brexit psychodrama to colour our positioning too much as we go into those negotiations. However, I think it's fair to point out that our fishing communities were badly let down by the previous Conservative government, who had spent years promising that Brexit would be a boon for British fishers, yet perhaps in contrast to the member for Dumfries and Galloway, I think. In Brixham, in my constituency in South Devon, the fishers there clearly feel very betrayed by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who actually toured the harbour there, promising them the earth, and then cast them adrift at the 11th hour, giving EU vessels virtually the same rights that they had under the common fisheries policy, while burdening our own vessels with a millstone of veterinary certificates and border checks if they want to export their fish to the biggest market they have in the EU, particularly our shellfish exporters, who have been incredibly badly affected by the red tape they now find themselves tied up in. The National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations described the post-Brexit TCA as a near-complete capitulation to the demands of the EU. And the former government's botched deal has undoubtedly harmed the UK fishing industry and caused great uncertainty, which only increases now as the end of the transfer period approaches. But it's not just fishers, as we've heard, who are affected by all of this. It's the entire supply chain and the infrastructure that keeps our coastal communities vibrant. So the Liberal Democrats hope that the current government is entering into negotiations with our valuable fishing industry uppermost in its mind. One tangible benefit that the industry had post-Brexit was the ability of the UK to develop its own fisheries management measures, an evidence-led process which is intended to be focused on long-term environmental, economic and social sustainability, and very different to the common fisheries policy, which still remains top-down, bureaucratic and riven by political compromise, as many members have said. However, it is vital that real-world scientific data is incorporated swiftly into stock management decisions to reflect what is actually happening on the ground, or rather in the sea. The Liberal Democrats believe there is a real issue in relation to data-deficient stocks, which is impacting the sustainability of fishing quotas. Bycatch rules are leading to fish being thrown back into the sea that will not survive, making a nonsense of sustainability objectives and impacting the livelihood of UK fishers who could land those fish. Small species of fish which could be caught and offer economic benefit are not properly accounted for within the quotas. So we believe the government must consider appropriate IC's alternative advice scenarios which deliver similar results for stock sustainability to ensure that the socio-economics have also been carefully considered. So take Pollack, for instance, a formal review by ICES, as my honourable friend has said. The formal review is due in June 2025. This advice must be fed quickly into management decisions. And currently we also have no management in place for the recreational fleet, which the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation estimates to be up to 50% of the total pollock catch. So the zero tax for pollock is severely impacting the under-10 fleet that rely heavily on this stock, and catch data for commercial and recreational sectors shows that the under-10 metre fleet is responsible for the lowest catches of pollock and impact on stock, yet it's this sector that is impacted most by the current approach to management. So I echo my honourable friend's call to the Minister to commit to introducing any new management of the pollock stock with immediate effect upon publication of the advice, and not to wait until January 2026. And will he look again at recreational catch limits? Anecdotal evidence would suggest substantial tonnage of fish being caught by boats claiming to be recreational, even those with zero total allowable catch, such as pollock. We also need to look again at bluefin tuna catch limits, a species that is now becoming more abundant in our waters and, as we've heard, regularly being caught by recreational anglers as well. Of concern to the South West Fish Producer organisation members and those operating in and around Brixham is the impact of recent annual quota negotiations on the highly valuable sole fishery in the Western Channel, which has been cut every year for the past 3 years. This year it was cut by 3%, despite the latest encouraging ICES advice identifying no immediate issues with the stock. And this decision stemmed from a management decision made in 2023 as opposed to the concerns about the stock itself. So these catch limits are unfairly targeting the inshore fleet of smaller boats. As we've heard, super trawlers represent just 4% of UK fishing boats, but account for 75% of all fish landed, whereas the under 10 metre fleet account for just 1% of all fish landed. The Liberal Democrats are committed to ensuring that sustainability is at the heart of our post-Brexit strategy on fisheries by reforming the fishing quota allocation system to reward the most sustainable fleet and ensuring all catch limits are set at sustainable levels. And I think the example of Geoff Hicks in the Scillies shows how imbalanced the regulations are in an industry that includes such a wide variance in vessel size and activity. We would radically overhaul how our quotas are allocated, prioritising support for SMEs, revitalising local economies and better protecting our seas from environmental harm. Now, in 2018, when Shadow Environment Secretary Sue Hayman MP said ministers needed to take urgent action to use the powers that they have domestically to redistribute fishing quota to deliver a fairer deal for smaller boats. Excuse me. Now that Baroness Hayman is a DEFRA minister, is the government in favour still of redistributing quotas to support smaller boats? We urge the government to consider the rollout of a multi-year quota system, which would enable the industry to plan into the future rather than adhere to the current annual cliff edge system. This would provide certainty for fishermen and the industry and support the recovery for most of the fishing stock. However, we must also ensure that some flexibility is built into that arrangement, as climate change is affecting fish stocks, and we can see from the arrival of more bluefin tuna in our waters that things are changing, and it's vital that the industry is able to review catch limits as the marine environment changes. So EU vessels still have free access to UK waters in the 6 to 12 nautical mile zone, whereas we don't have the same in the 6 to 12 mile zone in EU waters. And the NFFO has described this distribution as radically inequitable, and I'm sure we would all agree with that. Under proposals published last week, we've heard the EU's €150 billion defence fund will only consider purchasing British weapons if the Prime Minister signs a security pact with Brussels, something France has tied to fishing rights. And the President of the European Council has said the EU will not let the question of fishing rights derail a pact with the UK on security and defence. I think most honourable members contributing today have echoed that we should not allow the defence of Europe and the security of our nation to be negotiated against the fishing industry. Thank my honourable friend. Can the Minister confirm that he will go out to bat as strongly for our own fishing fleet in the negotiations as it looks like the French are going to do? And if not, can he commit that he will at least try and get some of the red tape on exports to the EU removed? The Labour General Election Manifesto said we will seek to negotiate a veterinary agreement to prevent unnecessary border checks. But almost 9 months later, British exporters have passed the milestone of 1 million export health certificates issued since Brexit, every one of them representing time and money lost by British fishers and farmers. So can the Minister assure our hard-working constituents that the deal for 2026 and beyond will include an end to the requirement for export health certificates so that whatever our fishers are able to catch, they can sell to the widest possible market at the best possible price? Mr Vickers, food security is national security. Protecting, promoting and supporting our fishing industry is vital to this security. And I look forward to hearing the Minister's response to some of the questions raised and the points made here today. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Vickers. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for this important debate on the impact of quota negotiations on UK fishing. Can I first congratulate the member for St Ives on securing this important debate, and I thank him for his opening remarks, some very thoughtful remarks about science and sustainability, and very interesting comments as well about species like pollock, Dover sole and bluefin tuna, and very thoughtful comments about bycatch as well. So can I congratulate him again on this? We've had some very thoughtful contributions from members across the House. The honourable member, my honourable friend for Chester South and Eddistry, as has been echoed by many colleagues, the importance of fishing for food security. My honourable friend, the member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, talking about the opportunities for UK fishing having departed the European Union. My honourable friend for Dumfries and Galloway, the importance of not having fishing as a bargaining chip in these EU negotiations, the importance of the UK as an independent coastal state, and mentioning also the important issue faced of spatial squeeze. My honourable friend, the member for Gordon and Buchan, the importance of these quota negotiations, what it means to real people in communities across the country, and important points on paperfish and very important comments on sustainability. And the honourable member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes talking about the diversity of businesses and people that depend on UK fishing. I'm sure that members gathered here need no reminding of the importance of our UK fishing industry. Fishing has always been vital to the UK across our 4 nations. It has been the lifeblood of so many communities up and down our country. Island and rural communities are particularly reliant on a strong fishing industry for their local areas to thrive. And it's incumbent on all of us in this chamber to make sure that the views of fishing communities are heard. Now, we on this side of this House, we admit we did not get everything right in the negotiations with fisheries whilst in government, and I'll be very open on that point. But as we move forward, as we head towards 2026, we've at least made some progress. When we were in government, we worked to secure the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement for Fisheries in 2021. The TCA represented the UK's first domestic fisheries legislation in nearly 40 years, which I welcome the last government took advantage of to increase our fishing quotas. In 2024, the UK negotiated 785,000 tonnes in quota, worth around almost $1 billion to the UK fishing industry, a major achievement and an important step in the right direction for UK fisheries. By 2026, Mr Vickers, this will amount to 146 million, or 25% of the previous annual EU catch from UK waters. Significant quota increases have benefited the pelagic sector, particularly for species like herring and mackerel. We also secured new deals with other coastal states such as Norway. These agreements, negotiated by the last Conservative government, were designed to get the best outcomes for the fishing industry. Now, after June 2026, the Labour government must take a strong stance in negotiations moving forward with the EU to secure the fishing industry's long-term future. Despite attempts at reassuring the industry, it is undeniable that many people remain concerned, as we have heard today, that the Labour government may use fishing as a simple bargaining chip in its attempts to renegotiate a reset with the EU. It is vital that the government does not cede fishing grounds to countries such as France or other states as the price for a closer relationship with the EU, as any such deal would be a major blow to our UK fishing industry. I note that when asked about this in defence questions on Monday by my honourable friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary, the Defence Secretary for the Government clearly failed to deny that fishing could be a sacrifice in discussions on defence. It is absolutely incredulous that we are hearing reports, as we have heard today, out of Europe that the UK may be excluded from the £125 billion EU Defence Fund unless the UK capitulates and gives the EU what it wants on fishing rights. Our collective EU defence security that the UK contributes so much to must not be jeopardised, and nor should our fishing communities be used as a bargaining chip. Could I please therefore ask the DEFRA Minister to confirm today, since the Secretary of State for Defence did not this week, that the government will not bargain away our fishing industry in such important deliberations about our international security. There are already questions to be raised over the negotiations for fishing opportunities concluded by the government in 2024. DEFRA's own research on the economic outcomes of annual negotiations for UK fishing opportunities in 2025 has shown a 38,000 fall in tonnage for this year's quota compared to last year, a decrease of 5%. Negotiations with other coastal states in particular saw a 15% fall in tonnage for this year's quota compared to last year, representing a loss of £65 million. It is vital that this new government secures good deals for the fishing industry, and I would urge the Minister and the Government to provide more clarity on why the quota negotiated for this year has actually gone down. It is also important to note that the benefits of negotiations are not just raw numbers of tonnes secured, but ensuring we have proper process using rigorous scientific data, so the right types of fish are also available to UK fishermen and the fishing industry, meeting economic and environmental concerns under the Fishery Act. Pollock, as we've heard about today, for instance, is an abundant fish in UK waters, but the UK only has 24% of pollock quota. Now, as we've heard, the previous government put in place support in this area, and again, we ask the Minister what the government will do moving forward in terms of the management of pollock. It is important that we fish sustainably, and I would note that in Scotland, as we've heard today, around 70% of key commercial stocks are fished at sustainable levels. While it shows that there is scope for improvement, this is an upward welcome curve from around 35% in 1991. The UK can be proud that their fishing industry follows the science and looks to care for their waters. As my honourable friend for Gordon and Buchan strongly articulated, no one has a greater vested interest in the health of their seas and the health of their fish stocks than the very communities whose livelihoods depend upon them. This need for proper rigour in process must also extend to energy policy and the case of offshore wind, to ensure that while we are certainly doing what we can to meet our energy security needs, we are not at the same time enforcing a spatial squeeze on our hard-working fishing industry without properly ensuring we are meeting our needs under the fisheries legislation and policy making. As with much of our environmental approach, we should be ensuring the right projects are pursued in the right places, balancing competing priorities fairly. And I would be grateful if the Minister could provide assurance that his government are looking to do this. While economic considerations must properly be considered in these debates, it is important that we do not lose sight of the human we do not lose sight of the human element and the welfare of protected marine species. Both are important to ensuring the fishing industry can continue to succeed and to protecting precious natural resources as the impact of quotas. So important for the future of fishing, Mr Vickers, is the mental health of our fishing communities. Fishing is undeniably a dangerous and demanding industry, and the stress and anxiety that comes with the job is only made worse by the financial pressures and uncertainty that many fishing communities face. The fishing industry does incredibly tough and dedicated work to help support the UK's food security, and I would urge the Government, as I have done previously, to work on a cross-party basis on improving safety and access to mental health support for all those working in the fishing industry. In the last Parliament, the EFRA Committee published its cross-party report on marine mammals, an inquiry that I triggered. This report highlighted the issue of bycatch, in particular in which seals, dolphins and other sea life are tragically snarled in fishing gear. The Minister and I have debated this and talked about this a lot. An estimated 650,000 marine mammals are believed to die each year worldwide from being needlessly caught and snarled in fishing gear, including more than 1,000 in UK waters. Steps have already been taken to help end this unnecessary loss, such as the work on the introduction of remote electronic monitoring that began under the last government. Yet it remains clear that more action is needed to address this issue. The last government's ultimate goal was to make electronic monitoring systems on fishing vessels mandatory once we were in a position to do so, including non-UK vessels. According to the Marine Management Organisation, only 6 marine mammals were reported by fishing vessels as bycatch injuries or deaths in 2023. Yet the last government's bycatch monitoring programme previously estimated that between 502 and 1,560 harbour porpoises, 165 to 662 common dolphins, and 375 to 872 seals were captured as bycatch in UK fisheries in 2019. I would again ask the Minister, as I've previously asked, whether they think the issue of bycatch of marine mammals remains underreported, and whether the Government can provide any further clarity on the timescales for introducing electronic monitoring systems in a sensible and pragmatic way. Mr Vickers, the UK also has a very important role to play with our global soft power. Like I'm sure all members, I am strongly opposed to the hunting of any cetaceans, dolphins, whales or porpoises. Mr Vickers, there is no humane way to kill a whale, so that barbaric practice must end. Now, although there is a tradition in the Faroe Islands of killing pilot whales and dolphins for meat and other products, the previous government long expressed their concern about the welfare issues surrounding these cetacean hunts and the domestic regulation currently in place. Ministers in the previous government urged the Faroe Islands to look at alternatives and encouraged its representatives to consider the many economic and social benefits responsible cetacean watching can bring. We do very much welcome in the quota negotiations that the government recently secured 2,000 tonnes of fishing in this year's round of negotiations with the Faroe Islands. However, can I please ask the Minister to comment on whether the government has used our soft power to set an example to the world by raising our stance on these hunts with international partners such as the Faroe Islands, and our stance on whaling more widely in negotiations and international meetings, as whaling is still horrifically practised by countries like Norway, Iceland and Japan. Mr Vickers, the next few years will be decisive for the UK fishing industry. As we approach June 2026, when the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement expires, the government must make clear their plans for negotiations to secure the best outcomes for the fishing industry. Any negotiations must ensure that our fishermen and women retain unrestricted access to our own waters as a sovereign coastal state. And I know that the opposition will work tirelessly to scrutinise any deal put before Parliament to make sure that our fishermen and women get the best possible outcome. National security, food security and energy security are all absolutely critical, and they need to be addressed sensibly and strategically in their own rights. But within this, our fishing communities must not be treated like a bargaining chip within these domains.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. It's a pleasure to speak with you, serve with you in the chair today. And could I start by giving my thanks to the Honourable Member for St Ives for securing this debate. I really welcome the opportunity to discuss and talk about the UK's fishing and seafood industry, and particularly the impact of quota negotiations on the UK fishing fleet in 2025. And can I thank all members who contributed for what I think is, again, a very constructive and thoughtful set of contributions. I'd start just by agreeing with much, actually, of what the Shadow Minister has said, and on his particular points he raised towards the end of his speech around cetacean hunts. I can assure him that at every opportunity we have pressed that case. And on remote electronic monitoring, that's exactly why we will be proceeding with that. So I think there is common cause on some of those issues. Now, many issues have been raised. We have heard from all around the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, England, Scotland, and I think what we've seen, and of course the South West, and I think what we've seen is a huge diversity of interests, very much as my honourable friend from Grimsby was pointing out. This is a complicated sector. And I will try and do my best to cover as many of the points as possible, but to give members a sense of where I'm going so they don't feel I'm leaving them out, I'll start with some general points. I will then touch on the reset with the European Union, say a little bit about the spatial squeeze, and then particularly address the points, the very detailed points that members from the South West has raised. And I'd start by thanking the Honourable Gentleman for what I thought was a very thoughtful and sensible introduction on a whole range of issues, and can reiterate how much I enjoyed that visit back, it seems quite a long time ago now, in the glorious late summer last year. And very much enjoyed seeing the diversity of the fishing fleet in Newlyn, the fish market, and of course listening to the many views of fishing and seafood businesses. Because actually, it is only in those direct discussions with people working on the front line that I can be properly informed. It's all very well sitting around having policy discussions. Actually, the best way to hear is, of course, from those people. And it allows me to restate at the outset just how important the fishing sector is as a source of sustainable food for our country. That point has been made on a number of occasions by speakers, but also those wider social, economic and cultural issues that come from such a historic sector. So, as a government, we're very keen, and my Secretary of State has repeatedly said this, to co-create policy through listening to fishermen and their representatives so we can create better policy. It is, of course, a very challenging job, and exactly as the Shadow Secretary rightly said, a dangerous job still, too often, sadly. And so it's always right to pay tribute to those who have been injured or those who have tragically lost their lives at sea over the last year. And the Marine Accident Investigation Branch published its 2023 annual report in October. It detailed the tragic loss of 4 lives and 3 fishing vessels lost in 2023, and it's always important we remember that. And it's important that the good work to improve safety continues. I will touch on the regulatory issues a bit later, but safety has to be paramount. And I'm afraid we also still have underreporting, a point flagged up by the Marine Accident Investigation Branch. Now, the title of the debate is about the fisheries negotiations for 2025 and the impact on the industry, and it's timely, so thank you for calling it now, because we published reports on the sustainability and economic outcomes of the negotiations just last week. And the Independent Sustainability Outcomes Report states that the number of fish stocks set in line with scientific advice stayed the same for 2025 compared to last year, whilst the Economic Outcomes Report details the UK fishing opportunities for all UK quota stocks in 2025. And I think, as was referenced perhaps by the Chair of the Select Committee, these are quite complicated reports for people to make sense of. And I recognise the point made by the Honourable Lady from Gordon and Buchan about the figures. Take slight issue in the sense that, yes, 769,000 tonnes of quota, a little bit down, but in terms of value, I'm told it's just slightly up at 1.04 billion, but about the same. But I think the issue here is our share has remained constant. The problem is the overall amount and scientific advice has fallen, and that's an issue we need to be mindful of. Because I think one thing that everybody agreed on is it's essential we follow scientific advice. You obviously have to interpret that advice in line with legislation and policy, but overall we still have a challenge globally in terms of how we're maintaining our fish stocks. So our approach as an independent coastal state to all negotiations has been driven by our own domestic priorities. And sustainability is at the heart of this. We aim to set catch limits to take account, as I've said, of the best available scientific advice, but we will always back our British fishing industry and through negotiations push for the best possible opportunities for British vessels. But that's a complicated set of trade-offs and negotiations, and I have many different parts of the sector coming to me, quite rightly making their case, and they do it very well, but we have to get the best deal that we can for everybody. So in that spirit, for example, in our bilateral negotiations with Norway for 2025, we trialled a new approach by working closely in partnership with UK industry representatives to develop a package of quota exchanges. And this approach stems from our commitment to putting more emphasis on delivering our policies and programmes in partnership with stakeholders. Now, that's not just us doing it, but working with the industry to do it. And the feedback from the industry about addressing the balance of those who contribute and benefit from those negotiations has been broadly positive. And in light of that feedback, my officials will be hosting a series of workshops this year with stakeholders to help us consider how we take forward our negotiations for the next year. I'm determined that we do things differently under this government and keen that we can co-deliver wherever possible. Now, I wanted to go on to talk a little bit, just before I do that actually, the multi-annual quota question that the Honourable Gentleman raised, and we did discuss this a little bit a few months ago. When setting tax for stocks, as I've said, we are guided by the best possible scientific advice. And for most stocks, that's provided annually by the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, ICES. And that annual point, I think, is important. But for some stocks, such as black scabbard fish, northern shelf ling, ICES provide biannual advice, so we agree catch limits for more than 1 year. And in some forums, we are seeking long-term management strategies which can provide greater stability for industry between years. So I hear his point, we're looking at it, but still I think it's important that we do respond to that annual advice. Now perhaps the most consistent point, I certainly will.
I mean, obviously, I'm not a fisheries scientist, but nevertheless, a lot is known about the minimum sustainable yield, about the recruitment into each of those species, which are commercial fisheries, and indeed the length of life, as it were, and when those species reach sexual maturity. So I find it surprising, really, that the scientists aren't able to actually provide some projections into future years, even if they're only indicative. It would be helpful, I think, to the industry to know that data.
I hear his point, and I will go away and discuss further. Look, virtually every member who spoke talked about our relationship with our near neighbours in the European Union, and clearly there is a negotiation going on by proxy, if not directly at the moment. So I'm not going to comment on the individual points that have been made, other than to reflect the fact that we are determined to get the best possible outcome for our nation, and I'm determined to get the best possible outcome for our fishing sector, because I think there's a widespread sense that people were sold short last time round. 2026 is the year when the temporary adjustment period for fisheries access ends. That was agreed in the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And as a government, we are absolutely committed to that reset with the European Union, but I can give you a total assurance that I'm absolutely determined that we get a good outcome for the fisheries sector, because we've proven our ability to build a strong relationship on fisheries matters, such as quota negotiations with the EU. We've had 5 years of annual negotiations. In that time, we've put in place strong foundations upon which to take forward future agreements where we can agree with the EU to benefit our shared fish stocks and our respective industries. But clearly, there are other countries that push very hard on this. We will push equally hard for our sector. So in 2026, the fisheries heading of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement will see access for EU vessels to the UK zone become a matter for annual negotiation, to sit alongside our annual consultations on catch limits with a range of coastal states and international fora on fishing opportunities. And that's a very important point. Our ambitions for fisheries are no longer tied to the EU common fisheries policies. We have our own objectives. We're making progress on things like fisheries management plans, which are very, very important. And this is central to our priorities for UK fisheries and the thriving and sustainable industry that we want. Now, clearly one of the biggest issues that's facing the sector at the moment is the spatial squeeze. And I want to send a message beyond this debating chamber this morning to the industry to say, I am absolutely determined, again, that we stand up for our fishing sector. There are a whole range of things that we need to achieve in our waters, but food is one of them. And it's only going to get more difficult in the coming period, but we've established, I think, a very good process for trying to resolve these issues through our Marine Spatial Prioritisation Programme, and we're going to take a strategic approach to managing those dilemmas. But I do not underestimate how strongly people in the fishing sector feel about this. It's been raised with me repeatedly. We put out a written statement a few weeks ago, a very strong statement, which I insisted upon in terms of protecting the fishing sector. Very happy to.
Thank the Minister for giving way on this point. It's the same point I wanted to make with the Shadow Minister. Is there a sense within DEFRA with the Minister that there has been great progress made, particularly around the Celtic Sea and the approach that the Crown Estate has taken to engaging with the fishing community at the earliest possible stage to try and minimise the impact of spatial squeeze?
Well, the Crown Estate play a very important role in this, and we are working very closely with them. And but I think things have improved, I would say. So I don't think it's always been an easy relationship, but we have a strong process, and I'm confident that that will work successfully. I'm conscious at times, I do want to move on to some of the points that were raised, particularly around the issues around the southwest. Very much taken with the points made about low-impact fishing by the honourable gentleman. Again, this is a complicated set of issues, but for the under-10s, I was very pleased that from January 2025, the licence cap of 350 kilograms of quota species was removed. This was something that was quite contentious a while ago. Gives fishers greater flexibility to diversify between quota and non-quota species. The pollock issues clearly have been very, very fraught and are complicated, and I'm afraid the advice that I'm going to give the honourable gentleman is perhaps not entirely what he wants to hear, because we agreed with the EU a bycatch-only TAC for pollock, which equates to a UK share of 172 tonnes of pollock in Area 7 for 2025. I'm afraid the IC's advice, and I hear what he says about abundance, but the IC's advice is what we have to follow. They advised for a zero catch as last year, and their current advice is that they don't see signs of recovery. So that is clearly a problem in the short term. We are forecasting to allow for a 20% increase in stock biomass next year. Now, on the recreational pollock fishing is question, I absolutely get the strength of feeling around this, and we've sent a very clear signal, I think, that this is the last opportunity for this to work for the recreational sector. Voluntary guidelines have been developed by the Angling Trust and the Professional Boatmen's Association. They're encouraging anglers to adopt a bag limit, minimum conservation reference size, closed season to avoid the spawning period, and use descending devices to reduce pollock mortality. So we want to see if these measures can work, but if they don't, I'm prepared to introduce mandatory measures. So I appreciate this is still a very difficult question in the area. I just want to move on briefly to sole. This is quite a complicated issue around 7H and 7E for people outside the industry. This is probably an incomprehensible conversation, but there's a potential genetic connectivity between the two. So we are looking closely at that. We're working with the EU in the specialised committee, Fisheries Committee, to facilitate consideration of that data by the relevant IC's working group to improve our scientific understanding and help the most appropriate management going forward. So there is work going on this, but I do very much appreciate that it's concerning. Just going back to pollock, on the point about the scientific work going on for June, that's something I'll go away and look at more closely and come back to the honourable gentleman on that. I do want to give him a minute to respond, so I will bring my remarks to a conclusion. Just like to conclude by saying, Mr Vickers, I very much appreciate the very wide range of challenges facing the sector at the moment. I understand why people are feeling anxious and fraught. It's a difficult time. But I think the way we tackle that is by working in close collaboration with people. So I'm determined that we work closely and listen closely. I genuinely want to give the honourable gentleman a moment to come back. So I will conclude by saying, as I said back in November, I genuinely think there is a bright future for the fishing sector. Very important that we understand it as a key source of food. The government's absolutely committed to making the most of these opportunities to ensure that we can properly contribute to food security and economic growth.
Andrew George to wind up.
Thank you very much, Mr Vickers. And I think we've had a very engaging and indeed thoughtful debate, as the Minister has said. And rather than going through in the small amount of time left for me, each of the contributions made by members from Dumfries, Galloway, Strangford, Gordon and Buchan, Grimsby and Cleethorpes, South Devon and Epping Forest, and the Ministers, just wanted to bring really back to the positive view that the Minister was clearly attempting to encourage us to accept with regard to the future of the fishing industry, and certainly that's the message we would like to come from this. On the specifics of the pollock total allowable catch going forward, I hope that the advice which he quoted a moment ago, where ICs apparently are saying that they don't see any signs of recovery, which certainly is contradicted by the industry as we speak in the catches in their nets, that I hope that we get updated advice prior to the completion of the benchmarking period, which will end in June. And I do hope that perhaps then I would appreciate it if I and the industry could meet with the Minister at that point to make sure that we get the most up-to-date evidence to advise how the industry can go forward, because this is going to be critically important for the opportunities for the rest of this calendar year. And I also welcome his comments with regard to looking once again at the regulations surrounding the recreational sector. So those are definitely points worth pursuing, as is the point that the Minister made and his response to me with regard to low impact small scale fishing as well, and perhaps we could have further discussions about that going forward. And we would I know that many honourable members would be very interested to know how that can be advanced. I mean, clearly, the backdrop of the apparent tie that is attempted being made between the fishing industry and defence is clearly one which is worrying us at the moment, and clearly the context of the trade and cooperation agreement likewise is a matter which obviously has created a shadow over which the debate took place today. So thank you very much, Mr. Vickers. I think it's been a very productive debate. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of quota negotiations on the UK fishing fleet in 2025. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.